I discovered a tracking device in my car, and in a moment of panic, I placed it on a cargo truck bound for Canada. Shortly after, I received a peculiar phone call that left me rattled. I thought I had a firm grasp on my life until a seemingly innocuous search for a ring unveiled a shocking secret. In that instant, I realized that someone had more insight into my life than I did. It was a moment of clarity that signaled my life would never be the same again, but what I uncovered was merely the tip of the iceberg of a looming disaster. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your mind reaches a conclusion that seems utterly absurd, yet you can't shake the feeling that it might be true? If you've ever faced such a dilemma, I could really use your help. I'm caught in a predicament where I feel paralyzed, unsure whether to turn left or right, and both paths seem fraught with peril. I'm beginning to suspect my wife of something that feels impossible, and no, it's not infidelity. I know that infidelity is a common theme in these discussions, and while it's often the first assumption, I genuinely hope that's not the case for me. Let me explain my situation. I'm Alex, and I've been happily married to my wife, Rachel, for several years. She has her quirks, but she's a wonderful partner who brings me joy, and I strive to do the same for her. I also have a fulfilling job, though it requires frequent travel. While the travel can be inconvenient, the financial rewards make it worthwhile. However, for Rachel, my absences breed suspicion and paranoia. This wasn't always the case. She didn't exhibit these traits when we first started dating. I met Rachel during my college years, and we quickly became close friends. She was one of the few people, alongside my childhood best friend Ethan, with whom I felt comfortable sharing my innermost thoughts. As time passed, our friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship, and eventually, we tied the knot. At that time, she seemed flawless, which made me wonder if she was concealing something. However, given our long history, I believed I would have noticed any hidden truths. A few months into our marriage, I began to notice Rachel's increasingly suspicious nature. She didn't shy away from expressing her feelings, admitting that her insecurities stemmed from my frequent travels. She feared that someone might come along and take me away from her. I won't lie, it can be a bit frustrating to deal with a paranoid spouse, but it's also endearing. It shows how much she values our relationship and how difficult it is for her to be apart from me, even for short periods. This constant need for reassurance can lead to arguments, especially when I miss her calls, but I remind myself that her intentions are rooted in love. It requires a great deal of patience to navigate these waters, and I often joke with Rachel about how lucky she is to have me, to which she playfully agrees. This is the rhythm of my life. I go to work, receive my travel itinerary for the week, and share it with Rachel. She feigns annoyance, but I always manage to make her laugh. However, this week was different. A few days ago, I learned I had to travel quite a distance for a client meeting. Unsurprisingly, Rachel was upset about my 2-day absence. When she gets upset, she can be quite childlike, and I often find myself working hard to soothe her. She understands that I have to go, but she plays along because she knows I enjoy the challenge of convincing her. After promising to take her to her favorite restaurant for dinner upon my return, she finally relented, and we had a lovely day together. The next day, I embarked on my trip. After the meeting, I checked into my hotel. The following morning, as I was preparing to leave, a colleague who had attended the meeting with me called, distressed because he had misplaced his ring and feared he had left it in my car. He had already returned to his office, so I assured him I would check and call him back. I stopped at a gas station and began searching every nook and cranny of my vehicle. Although I didn't find the ring, my colleague later discovered it had fallen elsewhere. I stumbled upon something far more intriguing. Tucked away in a spot I would never have thought to look unless I was searching for something tiny, I found a small device that looked suspiciously like a tracker. At first, I was merely speculating, but it quickly became clear that it could be nothing else. It was lodged deep under the seat, and there was no way it could have fallen there by accident. It was deliberately placed, which left me bewildered. I could understand if I were someone of significance, but I'm just an ordinary employee. My company always knows my whereabouts due to my travel schedule. I decided to take my wife with me when I returned home, so I informed my company that I had some personal issues and would be back the following day. I told my wife I had extra work to finish, then drove around for a while to see if anyone was following me. I was using everything I had seen in movies, as I never imagined I would find myself in such a bizarre situation. After some time, I was convinced that no one was tailing me, so I returned to the hotel to gather my thoughts. The most astonishing part of this whole ordeal was that it seemed to involve someone I didn't even know. How could they have placed the tracker? No one else drives my car except me, my wife, and my best friend, Jake. My wife is the one who usually cleans it because she enjoys tidying up, so it was clear to me that it would have been impossible for someone to install the tracker without one of us noticing. While I was lost in thought, my wife called to ask where I was. This struck me as odd because I had already sent her a message. Although she tends to be paranoid, she usually trusts me. But this time, she began to doubt me, accusing me of lying and repeatedly asking where I was headed. I found this particularly strange, especially given that I had just discovered a tracker in my car. I showed her over a video call that I was still at the hotel, and only then did she seem to believe me. This interaction made me suspicious of her. Could her own doubts about me have led her to place the tracker in my car? She was the only person I could think of who could pull this off without me noticing. Yet, it felt absurd to think that she would do something like that, especially since I had never given her any reason to be suspicious. My loving wife would never betray my trust like that. She would consider how I would feel if I found out she didn't trust me at all. I didn't want to entertain the idea that it could be her, so I decided to push that thought aside and return home. However, I didn't drive my car back. I wanted to see how things would unfold. I left my car at a friend's house and went home. When I arrived, my wife was furious and demanded to know the truth. She refused to believe that my car had broken down and was at the shop for a few days. What puzzled me the most was that she didn't even pause to consider whether I was lying. After all these years, I would have thought she could tell when I was being dishonest, but it was as if she had already made up her mind not to believe me. As much as I hated to think it, this only deepened my suspicions about her. I didn't want to believe she was capable of such a thing. If it were true, I would have to accept that our relationship was in serious trouble, and I didn't want to see my marriage crumble because I genuinely loved my wife. But why would she act this way toward me? I was deeply troubled, but I couldn't confront her until I had concrete evidence of her guilt. I needed to be sure before taking any action. To gather more information, I decided to place the tracker on a cargo truck headed for Canada. I wanted the person tracking my car to receive an alert when it crossed the border, indicating that I was miles away. I hoped this would help me escape the situation. However, what happened next was unsettling. Yesterday, I received a call from an unknown number, and all I heard on the other end was the heavy breathing of a man before the call abruptly disconnected. This terrified me. I didn't know anyone who would do something like this. Now, I was more anxious than ever, suspicious of everyone around me, including my wife. I felt guilty for even thinking this way, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I didn't want to confront her until I had enough evidence to determine whether she was involved. If she wasn't, I risked ruining our relationship for nothing. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and I've made a decision. I'm not sure if it was the right one, but it seems increasingly like I should have let this go when I had the chance. Based on recent events, I fear I've awakened a bear that could destroy my relationship. Let me explain. I've spent countless hours contemplating my decision, not just a day or two, but a full week. A few days after my last post, my wife's anger subsided. She apologized for her behavior, explaining that she was just worried and that her intuition had been telling her something was off. She asked me again if anything had happened, and I assured her it hadn't. Then she requested that I bring the car back, so I did. She seemed a bit surprised when I returned it. It became easier to suspect my wife when she was angry, but once she reverted to her loving self, missing out on a life she deserved. I stood there, listening to her weave this elaborate tale, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. How could she twist the narrative so completely? It was as if she had crafted a script for a soap opera, and I was the unsuspecting villain. I could see the shock on my parents' faces, and I knew I had to act quickly to reveal the truth. As I entered the house, I could feel the tension in the air. My parents were confused, and I could see the concern etched on their faces. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to unfold. I had set everything in motion, and now it was time to expose the betrayal that had been festering beneath the surface. I motioned for Liam to come inside, and when he did, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had no idea what was about to happen. I gathered everyone in the living room, and as I looked around, I felt a surge of determination. I had to confront them both. I started by addressing my wife. Melissa, you've painted a pretty picture of your life with me, but the truth is far from what you've described. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. You've been lying to everyone, and I have the evidence to prove it. I pulled out my phone and played the recordings I had captured. The room fell silent as my parents and in-laws listened to the conversations I had recorded, revealing the truth about the affair and the plans Melissa had concocted. I watched as her face drained of color, and the confidence she had exuded moments before crumbled into disbelief. Liam stood frozen, his expression shifting from shock to guilt as he realized the extent of the betrayal. Liam, I trusted you like a brother, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. You were supposed to be my best friend, and instead, you chose to betray me in the worst way possible. I could see the shame wash over him, but it was too late for apologies. The damage was done. Melissa tried to defend herself, but her words fell flat. You don't understand, Alex. I was unhappy. I thought I could find happiness elsewhere, she exclaimed, desperation creeping into her voice. But I wasn't interested in her excuses. I had given her every opportunity to be honest, and she had chosen deceit instead. As the reality of the situation settled in, I turned to my parents. I'm sorry you had to witness this, but I couldn't let her manipulate you any longer. You deserve to know the truth. My mother looked heartbroken, and my father's expression was a mix of anger and disappointment. I could see how much this hurt them, and it pained me to put them through this. In that moment, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had taken control of the situation, and the truth was finally out in the open. I had fought for my dignity and my family, and I wouldn't let anyone take that away from me. Melissa and Liam were left to face the consequences of their actions, and I knew that I had made the right choice in confronting them. As I walked out of the house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had been through hell, but I had emerged stronger. I knew that healing would take time, but I was ready to move forward. I had learned valuable lessons about trust, loyalty, and the importance of standing up for myself. I would rebuild my life, and I would do it on my own terms. In the days that followed, I focused on surrounding myself with supportive friends and family. I took time to reflect on what had happened and began to heal from the betrayal. I knew that I would never forget the pain, but I also understood that I had the power to create a new beginning for myself. I was determined to find happiness again, and I wouldn't let anyone stand in my way. As the confrontation unfolded, I couldn't help but marvel at how well Melissa played her part. She was acting so convincingly that she could have won an Oscar. Just then, Liam and his wife arrived, and it became clear that Melissa had orchestrated this moment, expecting her friend to be there as part of her elaborate trap. I maintained my facade of ignorance and asked Melissa what she was doing. I insisted that her claims were untrue, but Liam stepped forward, siding with her. He claimed to have witnessed some of the events she described and said that although he liked me, he couldn't stand by while I became a monster. I have to admit, they did a commendable job of convincing the family. At that moment, it seemed like they had everyone fooled. But I knew there was enough drama in the air, and I decided it was time to reveal the truth. I told everyone how Liam and Melissa were having an affair and that this entire situation was part of their scheme. The look of confusion on their faces was priceless. There was no way I could have known that unless I had evidence. I pulled out my recordings, photos of them kissing, and videos of their secret meetings. Dave had provided me with additional evidence that bolstered my case. As I laid out the facts, I could see the shock wash over Melissa's parents. When she attempted to explain herself, her mother slapped her across the face, and in that moment, Liam tried to say something to his wife, only to receive a slap as well. I told Melissa that the papers she had were fake and that we were done. She broke down in tears, and her mother declared that she was cut off from the family and would soon be receiving divorce papers. When Liam's wife also left him, he became furious and attempted to attack me. I quickly took him down, and my father called the police. Liam was arrested, and despite Melissa's pleas, we kicked her out of the house. My mother-in-law, who had been so supportive of Melissa, now apologized to me, and I reassured her that it wasn't her fault. When I returned home, I found Melissa waiting for me, begging for help and claiming she had nowhere to go. I told her I didn't care. It's been almost a month since then, and we are in the midst of divorce proceedings. Liam's wife also moved out and filed for divorce. Liam isn't doing well, you won't believe it, but he contacted me about a week ago, asking for help with bills and begging for support as his former friend. I told him he didn't even deserve to be called a friend and let him suffer the consequences of his actions. The last I heard about Melissa was that she tried to return to her family, but they made it clear she was no longer welcome. She stayed with some friends for a while, but they eventually kicked her out, leaving her practically homeless. I'm okay now, as okay as someone in my position can be. I'm making this update because many people have asked how my life is going and whether the divorce is finalized. Yes, everything seems to be improving, especially since I am no longer legally tied to Melissa. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago, and those have been the best 3 weeks I've had in a long time. Liam and his wife's divorce was finalized before mine, and if he was struggling financially before, it's now much worse since he has to pay alimony. I know Liam tried to reconnect with my ex-wife because during one of the divorce hearings, she told me she wasn't seeing him anymore and that we could start over. I told her that we could start over, but only separately. She began to cry, and her lawyer had to console her while looking at me as if I were the villain in this story, which I found quite amusing. My lawyer advised me to keep my interactions with her to a minimum, and I took that advice to heart. I don't understand why my ex-wife thinks that telling me she's not seeing Liam anymore would be enough for us to reconcile. That's not what I want from this divorce, I just want to distance myself from her. Many have criticized me for not recognizing the signs earlier, like how my ex-wife controlled me during my travels. They said that should have been my first red flag to leave the marriage. But let me explain, for people on the spectrum, it can be challenging to see these things. I find it easier to work with computers and servers, which is what I do, especially when I travel, because they are more straightforward to read. I'm not trying to justify my actions, I just want to share why this situation wasn't easy for me. I wish things had been different, but it's something I've dealt with my entire life. I could recount numerous stories of people taking advantage of my trust, but that would distract from the main issue.